Alrighty, happy Wednesday, everyone, and welcome back to our weekly events at Floxies community, our Wonder Wednesdays. I hope you're well, whether you're watching this video now live on YouTube or you're watching it in the future. Today's guest speaker will be Ankita Gupta, and she's a product designer and a Webflow developer, and we will be discussing how to design with fluid typography on Webflow, and also tackling a couple frameworks such as the Knockout, the Client First, and Wizardry. So when you think of fluid typography, what do you think about? Because I wasn't familiar with the term. All I could think about was like the blob from Ghostbusters, maybe. But I actually did some research, and I could guess that it was like a scalable typography. But if you want a more specific and technical description, fluid typography scales smoothly between the minimum and maximum value depending on the viewport width. There you go. That's your technical description of fluid typography, which is something that we will be talking about today at Floxies. So let's go ahead and join our space. Here we are into our Gather Town, what I like to call our accessible metaverse, where we meet every Wednesday. So let's go and meet the girls into our office. There's a couple people here.
I'm excited about your presentation today. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, same here. Good.
Good.
And Lorraine. Hi, everyone. Hello.
Hello.
How are you all? Hi, Ankita. Thank you so much for being here with us again.
Yeah, pleasure is all mine.
Hilary, how do you feel? Everyone okay? I've seen the girls before, some of them. Magdalena's here. Nice to see you. Aida, great to see you here again. Who else? Victoria, I briefly saw her with Stephanie earlier on.
Hello.
Hola, hola.
Hola.
Graziella, awesome. So Ankita, I was just telling the YouTube people, or just myself, about fluid typography. I wasn't familiar with the term, and out of like just a guess, I thought that fluid typography was something that probably scaled automatically, changing while you're changing the view on Webflow. And then I did some research, and I was like, oh, what's the actual like technical description of fluid typography? And what I found is that smooth scaling between the minimum and maximum value depending on the viewport width. And I don't know if you agree, but basically what Ankita will be teaching us today is a little bit more on fluid typography, and also she will be tackling some of the framework that we've seen in the past, like Client First from FinSuite, Knockout, Edgar Allan, and
Yes.
and Wizardry by Timothy Ricks, which I'm really excited to hear about. So Ankita, if you want to start and introduce yourself and the topic, please go ahead.
Sure. So let me just introduce myself. I'm Ankita Gupta, and I'm a lead product designer at a startup, and I've been designing for past 4 years. But I've been working with Webflow since 2 years, and it has been a great journey since then. So let me start with the fluid typography topic today. Basically, what happens is that when we transition from design to building in Webflow, so all our designs is basically in pixels. So we don't really get the idea of fluid typography because rest of the units that are being used are like REMs or EMs that are not there present in the design tools, whether it is Figma, Adobe XD, or your Sketch. So whatever the designers are creating, that are totally based on pixels. Now, pixels are actually absolute units that are fixed and they do not change based on users' preference. Now, what it really means is that I'll just share my screen and show a few examples related to it. Is my screen visible?
Yes, I can see it.
Right. So if you see this layout here, I have kept the heading as 48 pixels and your paragraph is 16 pixels. Now, if I give the even like this is in the content wrapper div, and if I give my padding and margins, like if I keep it as 16 pixels throughout here.
So you're using pixels right now.
Yes, just to show like, what is the drawback of using pixels in Webflow.
Mm-hmm.
So everything is right now set in pixels, but what really happens is that if I check this overview, it works completely fine, and I can even change these values based on the viewport. That is completely fine. It doesn't seems that anything is breaking, but the real problem is that the users can actually change their settings of the font size. If you I go to Chrome and click on appearance, I have this font size set as medium. If I click on it and click on large, you see the text has increased the size. Now, what happens is that if I go over here, this text size won't increase because they are based in pixels. They are in fixed units. Even in Webflow, you have the option to see like if the user has changed their preference, they have like increase their font size to 24 pixels in their settings, Chrome settings or Firefox or any other browser settings. You see there's no change in the font size now. So basically that is why we avoid using pixels in Webflow. Now let me come to the term other units that are being there in Webflow. Like for example, first we go to REMs. Now, REMs is basically the root for the root. It is the base of the root font that are being used by the browser. So one REM is actually 16 pixels.
Okay.
Now, if I go over there and click on 24 pixels, the heading size has increased to 24 pixels. If I go to 9 pixels, this heading size has again decreased because it is taking the root font of the browser's settings, browser's font. Now, if any user actually go and set it to very small, it will take 9 pixels. And if they take to medium, it is 16 pixels. And if it take to large, then it is, I think, around 24 pixels. And very large is 32. So that is why we prefer to use REMs instead of pixels. And here if I have to check, like if my designer has set the heading as 48 pixels, so what I will basically do is 48 divided by 16 and just write REM, and this gives me 3 REM, so I don't even have to calculate it. uh, if you go over here, it is 16 pixels, just write 1 REM, and this is it. And if I go and click on 20, reset it, this gives me the perfect view. And if the user scales to 24 pixels, it automatically increases based on the user's preference font size. Now, same applies for the padding and margins as well. If you see, I have applied in the content wrapper div all the pixels, 16 pixels. Now, these have not been scaling up and down because they have been set in pixels. But what if I set all of them in REMs? So again, if I set it to 24 pixels, then you see the change in the padding. It has increased drastically. If I click on 9 pixels, it decreases proportionately. So that was about REMs. Now, if you see the client first framework, it is basically working on REMs. So everything you see, whether it is margin, paddings, headings, paragraph, or even your container size, they are all have been set in REMs. Now, talking about next unit, that is EM. Now, EM is basically taking the font based on the parent element. Now, if I set this body, let's say I set it as 15 pixels, and I'm telling my heading that it should be 3 EM. First of all, let me reset it all H1. Right, if I set it as 2 EM, so what is actually happening is that here it is taking the font size from the parent. Now the parent is body over here. I have set it to 16 pixels. Now if I put the heading as 2 EM, it is actually multiplying with the font that is put on the parent element. That is 2 EM. Now if in the content wrapper, if I put it as 24 pixels, so heading will actually take that value from the content wrapper that is the immediate parent. So it is 2 into 24. So if we just calculate 2 to 24 pixels, that is 48. And you see there has been no change in it.
Ankita, do you mind if we just check if everyone is okay with this? Are you girls all confident and comfortable with these numbers? Do you want to repeat anything, or can we carry on? Hillary, I can see your thumbs up. Let me check the chat. Okay, I think you can carry on. Just checking everyone was following.
Great. So just wanted to repeat myself that one REM is equal to 16 pixels, and REM is basically taking the value from the browser's default font. And if the user change their settings from here, like medium to large or very large, then everything that has been set in REMs, that will take the value from the browser's font size. And EM is actually taking value from the parent block, that whatever value you set to the parent block, it will take the value from there. So if I put body as 16 pixels, so whatever content it is, I'm putting in EMs. Like in headings, if I put 2 EM, so it is actually taking value from body. Here I have put the content wrapper's value as 24 pixels. So that is why it is taking value from 24 pixels, 2 into 24, 48. And if I put paragraph as 1.5 REM, so that is actually taking value from content wrapper, that is 24 into 1.5. And if I just calculate, just check that there will be no change in the settings. That is 6. And if I put 1.5 EM, it is same. Then moving on to next, that is percentage. So for fonts, basically we use either pixels, EMs, REMs. We don't usually work much with percentages, view width, and view height. These are basically used for paddings, margins, and containers. Now, for percentage, let me tell you that 100% is equal to actually 16 pixels. So if you set your typography as 100 pixels, so it is actually 16 pixels. If I set my body here as 100%, it is 16 pixels. And let me just refresh this. Yep. Now, if I set my content wrapper, as you see, 24 pixels. So this paragraph is actually taking value from here, content wrapper, 100%. So that's why it gets very confusing, like, from where this paragraph is actually taking value from.
There's so much maths, I'm already confused.
So I would suggest that when you're working with your typography, don't work with percentages or view width or view height. Just focus on EMs or REMs. And with percentages, what we actually do is like define, for example, this I want to define like the view. This should, as you see, this whole div block is actually spreading across the whole screen. So if I want to define the width, so I will do that in percentages, like maybe 50%, and that's how I define the width. But mostly I'm using percentages in few of the scenarios that I will discuss right after a few minutes. Let me go back to another units that are view width and view height. Now percentages actually take value from again from the parent. Now if check, if you check this browser's default like 1000 pixels, right? And if I set this container wrapper to 50%, so it ideally it says that it is like taking 50% of this whole view width. But if you see that it is also carrying one page padding over here, 2.5 rem. So 2.5 is basically 5 rem, 5 into 6. Let me check. So it's 40 pixels. So basically, it is taking 50% of 920 screen size, because right now I have put 40 padding over here, 40 pixels padding over here. So it is taking 50% of this container. Is it clear? I hope I have not messed out too much.
Does anyone have any questions so far? Do you these formulas that you're using, like you multiplied the REMs times 16, is there like a magic book where you learn these formulas, or you knew them because that's you get to know these things out of practice, or
No, so basically, what the thing is that whatever we are working upon in the design, we always set our paragraph as 16 pixels, because that is the standard size we use in the design. Because anything below than that is not legible for reading, right? So based on 16 pixels, now if you go to that type scale, now whenever we are using in design, have to find out like what should be H1, H2, H3. So we keep our base size as 16 pixels, and based on that we find out like what should be our h1, h2, h3. Like for example, here it is 3.05 rem. Basically if you round it off, it is 48 pixels. So most of the designers are using headings and other text blocks based on this type scale, right? Now, 16 pixels is the standard size. That is why it gets easy to calculate, because if you see one rem, that is equal to 16 pixels. If you do not take any value, then one em is also 16 pixels. 100% is also 16 pixels, right? So our standard base size is always 16 pixels. Based on that you can calculate any you can have any calculations. And the best thing is that you don't even need a calculator or anything. You just, if you have the design and you see anything in pixels, you can easily calculate it in your webflow. For example, in this paragraph, if I have to set margin, if the designer has said that there should be a margin of 24 pixels, just do the simple thing, 24 by 16 REM, and I get 1.5 REM. Why I divided by 16? Because 1 REM is equal to 16 pixels. And if I have to check how much is 24 pixels in REM, so I have to simply divide 24 by 16. That's it. So you don't really need any calculations, and you don't have to memorize anything, or you don't have to open your calculator. You can just simply do it in the webflow itself. So yeah, let me show you first
there's some questions in the chat. So Imani is saying, so is REM ideal for padding as well?
Right. So I won't exactly say that it is the best, but like if you are beginning in Webflow as a beginner, it's better to work with REMs, even if it is for margins or paddings. But coming again to the different frameworks that we have, currently in Webflow. So let's take a look one by one and see, like, how they have charted it out. Now, if you see this home page, actually everything is right now built in RAMs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you see clearly, like if I scale it to 24 pixels, everything has scaled up. Now, there are few elements that have not. For example, this logo, this droplets, and these elements. This is because when we are scaling up everything in typography, if you set everything in RAMs and you don't set your images with SVGs or images width and height, then they don't scale because they are automatically by default set in pixels. So the best practice is that you, for example, this header droplets, it is in absolute position right now. Now what I will do is I will keep it in a div block and just give this like droplet wrapper and give this droplet wrapper like 5 rem height and width. And right now it is in absolute position, so it is taking value from header wrapper. I will just make it static. You see that in droplets, actually I haven't just a second. If you see in the droplet head, I haven't actually set any width or height. Now what if I do I've actually now put it in a div block droplet wrapper and set its width and height 5 rem. Now I make it absolute position to header wrapper and keep it as like 15 pixels, I guess. Maybe a little bit down.
So the wrapper is okay to be in pixels.
So wrapper is actually set in REMs.
Oh yeah,
Not
it's
in
the position. Yeah, it's the position.
Yes. Now earlier it was not actually scaling up. If I use 24 pixels, okay. If I reset it, you see now that this droplet is also scaling up. Whether these elements, I haven't really like defined their width or height, so they are not scaling up automatically. So whenever you're working with any images or SVGs, make sure that whatever div that you're putting them in, they have the well-defined height and width in REMs or even EMs that can scale up when we are working with these user preferences. Now, if you see one more thing, like if I increase the size, like if I change this, then the droplet's position is actually changing. Sometimes it's going up, sometimes it's going down. It's not really well defined because again I'm using pixels. Now the best ideal situation over here is to use percentages. If I use 40%, 12%, and over here okay. So earlier those values were defined in pixels. Now I have defined them in percentages. The advantage of using percentages, now it is calculating the width and this height, the viewport height and this viewport width based on the percentages, based on the parents elements percentages. So now you see it is not moving up and down. It is constant. So I always suggest that whenever you are using absolute position for any image or any text, any div block, just use percentages. That way, it will automatically calculate the height and the width, and the position of that particular element is constant throughout the viewports, all the viewports.
That's really helpful. makes sense.
Yes. Okay. Um, right. So far, this is one thing. Now, even for line height, I have seen that many people put like, if it is 116 pixels and they get from the designers like, something related to like maybe 24 pixels. So I always tell them that in Webflow, whenever you're working, so don't put any values over here. It's good to have percentages. So you can just define like maybe 150 percentage, or then work according to dash. This 1.5 is actually percentage only. So that way, you don't have to calculate again and again for every, set of typography that you're working. For example, for height, I work with 1.1 dash. Now, if you have in the design 1.2 dash, that's fine. So that way you don't have to, again, like set in REMs, like what should be the line height based on REMs or pixels or EMs. That way it can get very confusing. So it's better to define it like in percentages, and it's easy for you also to get that values. You don't get actually stuck in too much values, right? So just keep it idle. Like for paragraphs, it is 1.5, and for all the headings, it is 1.2 or 1.1. Now that was about client first. Now second thing is about EM concept, right? Now in EM concept, what happens is in Wizardy, if I said, like I have talked about type scale over here. So what basically designers do is that they have kept the base size as 16 pixels, and based on that, they are actually calculating the H1, H2, H3, right? Now, if I see H1, it is actually 3 times of my base size. So what I can do is that if I keep my body at 16 pixels over here, I can define my H1 as 3 rem. And similarly, my H2 will be 2.5, roughly around that, just rounding off the values. 2.5, then H3 as 2. Now, the benefit of using EM is that in case I feel like I add one more breakpoint,
Everyone
right?
is saying in the chat they hate maths. But this is really useful, and everyone is agreeing that it's really useful for responsive design.
Yes.
And Carmia says, this is why all my websites are broken.
Yes, that's why it's like very tough to get these to get to understand these values, because we haven't really worked on them in the real case scenarios. Now, if you see, yep, that we were working upon getting these values based on our base size 16 pixels. Now, 16 pixels works fine on 2040 screens and even on tablets, but when you go to your big screens over here, so actually your paragraph size, you might feel that it is too small to read. Like your H6, it is actually, I think, 16 pixels. So what happens is that your H5 is in 16 pixels. So what the designer might suggest is that for larger screens, let's keep our body size as 20 pixels. Now based on that, he wants to increase the H1, H2, H3 every size to be increased. Now instead of putting that those as, now if I go to type scale and use it like 20 pixels, now I get these values and I have to go manually and redo all the values. Like this is 61 pixels, so I have to check like 61 divided by 16 rem, it's almost like this, 3.3. And you have to again like go and keep it like 64 pixels for each breakpoints. Right now it is em, so it doesn't matter much. Why? Because if I go to my body size and I keep it like 20 pixels, so all the sizes increase proportionately. because 2.5 EM is actually taking value now from the body size that is set as 20 pixels. Right? So I don't have to define like H1, H2, H3 again, because they are now all taking values from my the body size that I've put over here. Now, using EM over H1, H2, H3 and putting your body font as pixels. Now, is it accessible? Do you think that it can change when the users increase their, font size settings? It basically won't. It stays the same. So what you actually have to do is that I hope this is visible, that the values are actually not changing. It's
Yeah.
just the padding margins. Yeah. So if
And
you
that's
see the
because you're using EM, it doesn't change because because you said, I took notes that EM takes the value from the parent block.
Yes. So EM is actually taking the value from the parent block that is actually set in pixels. So if I set this value as 1 rem, that is actually 1 rem is 16 pixels. So if I again check 24 pixels, so the size has increased. Right? So basically, whenever you are working on bigger screens or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's just that you have to keep your values in REMs, and your EM will actually take value based on the parent size, so parent container, whatever it contains. If that is based in pixel values, so it won't affect much when the user is changing their font settings. But otherwise, if you set it in REMs, like here we have done, here if I keep it 1.5 rem, so again all my headings will change drastically based on that. So far, let me know if there is any problem in this. All
Let's
good?
see, let's have a look in the chat. 16 is a magic number.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's good. Aida sharing the FinSuite extension for your Chrome that you can, what does it do? FinSuite extension to calculate pixels to REMs directly. That's Aida's cheating, someone says.
Ankita, hi.
Yeah.
Now that you're here, can you just show them, because I see that you have the FinSuite extension, so maybe you can show them like where is the calculator, because if they never done it, so you don't have to do it like all the time. I think it's helpful. Like I do this sometimes if I have like another number that is not 16 that I want to change into REMs.
Okay. So I haven't actually used it. Will it change it for the whole website?
No. So if you just go into Sales Client first,
Right.
so you just put there is the pixel to REM calculator, and then you have here all of this, and it's like you don't have to do any maths basically.
Okay.
This is for lazy people like me, so it's great.
Right. So
It's
basically,
helpful.
this is the FinSuite extension that I'm currently using. You can get it from Chrome, and once you download it, so here in the client first, we have this calculator.
Yes, for
It's
people like
useful.
me as well. Also, is it Graziella? Graziella is seeing Webflow for the first time. I promise it's much more fun. It gets better. Don't get scared. This is like typography, a lot of numbers, and it's super useful to know. So, I wish I knew this when I first started, and I started creating everything in pixels. And as Carmia was saying, all my websites were broken. And, if I knew this from the start, maybe I wouldn't have been so put off and scared. So it gets better. We will have an introduction on Webflow, but yeah, don't get scared.
Right. Okay, so when it comes to concept of fluid typography. So there, when you come to like client first. So right now, actually, I've added the breakpoint. Now, if I increase it to 2500, you can see that these are all in a container. Now, I've actually used large container, I guess. Still, you see that it's fixed in one particular thing. It doesn't really spread out the whole content based on my viewport. So the users who are using actually large screens, that's why they keep their even like user preferences as 24 pixels so that it can fill in the whole screen and it's easy to read. Now, if I go to wizardy technique that is being used by Timothy Ricks, now his whole layout is actually based on EMs. So let's see how he's working upon it. So this is the style guide by Timothy Ricks, and his heading and H2, H1 paragraph, and even paddings and margins, they are all set in EMs. If you see the container, I think he's even using that as well in 100 EMs, and even paddings also in EMs. Now, if you check the body, he has not set it in REMs or pixels. He has actually set it as one view width. Now, what is exactly one view width? One view width is actually the view width of the viewport. So right now, if it is 1068, so it is actually taking 1% of the 68. Now, sorry, I think it's 110% of 68. Now, if I keep it as 100 view width, 100 view width means 100% of the viewport. So one view width, yeah, it is 1% of 1068. So based on that, he has actually created then all EM. So if I go to H1, now H1 is set as 4.38 EM. Now what it is doing is it is taking the value of 4.38 into one view width. Now one view width, if so, how is it really responsive is that if I increase my view width to 1500, so my body font, the paragraph body font is actually increasing to like I think 15 pixels, and then heading is based on I forgot the value. H1 was, yes, 4.38 em, so 4 into 50, let's assume the round of value as 4 pixels, so 4 into 15, so that is around like 60 pixels. So if I keep on decreasing the value, decreasing the viewport width, so it keeps on decreasing the heading size because the value of the body font is actually based on this
On the
viewport
width.
width.
Yeah.
Yes. So if right now, like at 11.1166, the viewport width is, sorry, the body font is actually 11.66. And based on that, it is taking the heading value. That is why it's considered to be the fluid typography, and so far it has been efficient. But why people get confused is because if you go to the paragraph, you cannot actually keep it as based on the body because the body size is too small. You have to keep it in 1.5 em, right? And so if you go to like text link, and over here even the labels, you have to give some value to it, because if you don't give the values to it, they will look very tiny. So many people started complaining that when I'm using like this framework, everything looks very tiny on my home screen or on my pages. Why? Because it is taking the body value that has been actually set to very low, that is one view width. You have to give a class or set its own value, like for the, you go to all links, you have to actually set it to 1.5. But whereas in client first, if I go there, I am not actually doing that thing. It's actually taking all the values from the body itself until and unless I define that. So here I think I have missed something.
So these are three different frameworks that use three different ways of making their typography responsive.
Right. So, client first is very simple to use. It's just that you have to work with the REMs, and you have to just remember that one RM is equal to 16 pixels and convert all your designs into REMs. But when you're working with Wizardy technique, so like in client first, I showed you that everything is like squeezed into one container. If you go over here, even this particular layout is also using container, but it is not like squeezed into one particular thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually responsive. It is increasing based on the viewport, right? That's because it is taking the body font based on the viewport. Now, if you go to the tablet size, you can say that, in tablet it is looking very small because the tablet view is like 768 pixels only. So how can our, all the values be derived on based on that? Even in the mobile view, it will get too small. So
Mm-hmm.
what Timothy Ricks has actually defined is that for desktop, it is the body size is actually one view width, but when you come to tablet view or mobile view, he has defined it to 0.619. So that is the fixed width. That is the fixed value, 0.619.
Where does that number come from?
I think he calculated based on golden
Oh, okay.
ratio.
Okay.
Yeah, but it is again in EMs. So if you again change the body size over here, like even I can do it is like based on his concept, I can keep it like one REM. That's not an issue, and everything works well. But it's just that you see, the heading is not the heading size is not changing based on the view width, right? It is kept static. Now, if I keep it to one view width, it increases as we increase the viewport size.
Which one of these frameworks would you recommend using the most, or can you just pick and choose, or have you got a favorite one?
So recently, as a beginner, I started with Client First because it was easy to understand, and slowly I'm trying to get into Wizardy technique because what happens is that our designs keep breaking and the larger screens because in Client First the problem is that it is all contained within one container, so I have to keep define like larger screens and then work and for keep working on like start increasing the container size and again define those designs. So I would prefer like Timothy Ricks, but you have to get your basics right before
Mm-hmm.
even jumping into this framework.
Mm-hmm.
For knockout framework, it's really nice, but the only problem that I have with it that it has defined everything in pixels. So if you just go to over there, like heading, their paragraph, everything is in pixels. And if I actually go and view it like in 24 pixels, 32 pixels, it doesn't do anything. So that is actually not accessible. They have defined different large viewport size for it, but that's fine. Like, but it's very difficult for you to again and again like define the large screen. Still, what maximum size can you go about it? But the real good thing about Knockout framework is that they are using this padding in view width, according to view width. So if you know how to work with it, with the Knockout framework, I would suggest that you should turn all your headings and paragraphs into REMs, and then you can use their paddings and margins according to view width. The real benefit of this is that once you scale it up to larger size, to large screen sizes, so it actually it doesn't again keep your every content into one particular container. That's because the your content is actually increasing, your content is actually taking space as per the view your viewport. So yeah, that's about different frameworks that I have worked so far.
Mm-hmm. That's really helpful. Thank you so much. I a few people probably got scared, but it's totally normal. It could be intimidating, especially if you're a beginner. But as you're saying, it's important to get your basics straight first, and client first is probably the easiest way where to start, and then if you're trying to design for bigger screens, possibly look for different solutions for that reason as well. But for the most common website users, maybe client first will be enough for a beginner to start. Would you agree?
Yes, because even when we are actually tracking the user data, most of our websites are being used through mobiles. So I always say that, you should at least keep a view like your mobile, your whatever you are designing or whatever you're creating, it should be mobile friendly first. Though it should be desktop friendly too, but we shouldn't aim too much about like, it should look good even on large screen sizes, depending on the user preferences or depending on the target users that you have. So starting off with client first is easy, but if you really want to go with like making every your website look beautiful on every viewport with be it like 2500 pixels and less than that or more than that, then I think you can go with wizardry technique. That has been helpful so far.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you so much. And I'm sharing the link in the chat for people that want to check them out. Does anyone have any questions for Ankita here? Thank you so much, Ankita. Once again, really helpful, really knowledgeable. I envy your knowledge on, all these numbers, and like, I'm sure I'll get there one day. But thank you so much.
It's just that again, like, it's just that we have this basics, like, what uh, rem is equal to, or from where this em is taking the value, or what actually view width is taking value from. So understanding those basics, we can actually then understand how these frameworks are working. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to multiply 1.2. That's my way of like increasing fonts. Increase it by 1.2, and I don't even remember what course I learned that from, but that's how I've been rolling.
So yes, for me, like converting the designs to then these REMs has been easy just by calculating in Webflow itself. I don't really even remember like how much 2 REM or 3 REM can be, and then it goes about like 4 REM, 6 REM. It's difficult to have those values in mind. So just calculate in Webflow itself. And just as Victoria mentioned, you have there then in FinSuite as well those calculator. But yes, once you start working on it, so these values don't really matter much, because you get a hang of it and you realize, like, you get the rough estimate that whether you should be using one em or rem or two rem basis on that.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Penny. It's great to see you here, Penny. Welcome back from your holiday. And thank you for sharing the Webflow explanation of EMs and REMs and all of that. Thank you so much. Is Aditi here? Why? Oh, Aditi's here. Hello. That's nice. Carmia is saying, I wish I had your knowledge. So, Ankita, how did you, what would you say, how did you get good at this? Like, obviously, practice.
So basically, I worked with Jonathan Holden. He's an accessibility expert. So he told me like what are the benefits of using client first and how he himself changes the user preferences. So whatever I'm designing, he can easily spot it out that this is not based in REM. That's why it's not scaling up on my screen. He actually uses 2500 pixel screen, so he can spot everything like what's breaking down. So it gets easy for me to understand. But late yeah, for the past couple of few months, like whatever I'm building, it is not like really good on his screen because he's using such massive large screen. And in client first, everything is put in a container, so I'm like looking for the ways like how can everything scale up gradually based on the viewport. So that's how I found out about wizardry technique. But it was like as I started out, I found it difficult to understand what is this EM and how these, what is this one view with, how do you work around it. So it took me a little bit of time to understand like what are the things that he's actually fixing the values, what are the things that can, with which you can, actually change the things. So it's again like getting the basics right, and then I started researching about it and learned like how he's actually working on it.
Yeah.
That's how I got that.
That makes a lot of sense. I feel like I've always had like a block because whenever things look a little bit too with too many numbers, I get this block. Is from maths traumas from high school. But I guess we have to go past our blocks and like try and understand things. And once you actually get how it works, it actually becomes fun, and it's nice to see how they scale. It was really nice to see how they were scaling as you were explaining. So
Right.
you get that satisfaction of it actually works. So yeah, it's good to see.
So just as someone mentioned, like 16 is the magic number. So just keep that thing in mind, that everything is based on that base value 16 pixels. Because because if you even have to calculate anything, it is based on 16 pixels. That I know for sure. So everything I'm multiplying or dividing, it is based on 16.
Nice. Hillary is mentioning Mirella's template. Mirella, do you have a template in REM for Figma? Is she here? Oh, maybe she's not here anymore. Okay, we'll ask
Oh my
her.
God, she must have left. Okay, no, she does have an amazing Figma template, and she's basically put everything, including like spacers, all in REM, so you can like grab them and drop them and do your designs. It's beautiful. I'm trying to like, I have it. If I just share the, yeah, okay, I'm gonna send the community link that she's got, because it's very useful.
Yeah, she has lots of great useful things.
Yeah. Thank you, Ankita. That was so good. That was so nice to like understand, because I wanted to explore all of those tools, but I didn't. I just didn't. I haven't. So I'm glad that you did, and then we're able to share that, because that saves me a ton of time. And now I know, like, I'm happy that I hadn't, really worried too much about it and really tried and struggled with all the other ways. And now I'm just gonna go like REM and apply these frameworks and kind of work through that. So that's really nice. Thank you.
Yes, so I would just suggest that, try and go with one framework at a time. Don't just mess up with too many, because working with one framework will help you realize like what are the things that are working and that are not working. And it will take couple of time to understand that. And only then switch to, another framework and understand like each framework has its own advantage and disadvantage. So don't just try at once all the framework and think that, okay, I will pick from this one and this one. No, that won't work really.
That's for you, Aida. Mix and match.
Yeah, that's what I do. I want to use everything at once. I'm like, I don't like how this is scaled, so I'm changing one thing and then another, and then it's all, mess up, and then I have to start again. But hey, this is how you learn at the end of the day.
Right.
You just try it, but not all at once. You're right, Ankita. And now I'm laughing because as you were saying this, I'm like, yeah, that's my framework.
Right.
Oh, Mirella's
Yeah.
back. Mirella, we were looking for your Figma template with the REM.
Yeah. Any questions?
No, can you share it? Can you share it
Just
in the chat?
share the love.
Share the
Share
love.
it.
Share your knowledge. Can you share a link?
The link. Oh, yeah. I think I've already shared it on Discord.
Yeah.
Do you want me to share it here?
Yeah, people can't click on it anyway if they're not here, so don't worry.
Yeah. So they can find it on Discord.
Yeah, or you can put it in the chat, then it's fine. It will be just for us.
Okay. I need to open Discord because when I use Gather, I have to shut down every other app.
No worries. You know, if it's, we can share it in the chat because everyone here is in Floxies, so that's good. Next week, it doesn't get any easier, girls. Next week, we're gonna have JP teaching us 3JS for beginners.
Oh, that guy.
That's nice. I would like to join that because I too have been like wondering how to go about it.
Yes, please do come and, you know, take part. We probably need all the support. I need two brains to follow these kind of events. Well, thank you so much, Ankita. Thank you for being here again. Pleasure to have you. And thank you everyone else for being here today with us. And I hope to see you in our Discord. It's great to see you all. And I'll see you next week as well. I'm gonna shut the YouTube, and bye YouTube.